Good morning, everybody. We're talking with Colin Burke and Terry Miles of Intrado today. This is a very exciting opportunity to see inside an organization that has figured out how to do transformation and delivery at the team level. So Terry, Colin, welcome this morning. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, so how this came about is that I sit with customers who can't do what you do. And so I want to know how to do it. Why don't you start off telling us about the Intrado story? Because this is a long story and everyone needs to understand this is a long process.
Sure. I could sum it up in just a couple minutes. This is Terry. And Intrado has actually recently gone through a name change, and it's significant to this story. We used to be known as the West Corporation, approximately $2 billion a year annual revenue company. It was formerly publicly traded, acquired by the Apollo Group, a private equity company. But even before that acquisition, the West Corporation had traditionally been a holding company, not a software company, not any sort of operating company, but a holding company interested in acquiring acquisitions and generally leaving them where they lay. And that habit actually predates the entire idea of digital transformation. It generally predates the internet. So long before there was this idea of digital transformation, platform consolidation, and just making yourself more efficient as a technology organization, they had already had many different business units intentionally left isolated from one another in order to maximize their own performance locally. Enter the private equity group, enter the name change to Intrado. These are all signs of a fact that this is a company learning to consolidate in order to gain on efficiencies that are obviously, clearly, if you look at a balance sheet, low-hanging fruit. Our story is the story of not necessarily the first attempt at this company, but probably the largest scale and the most concerted attempt to be able to do the basic value proposition that almost any adopter of a large-scale business transformation, digital transformation, or platform as a service initiative would go through. You want to save money so that you can be more productive.
Great. Now, so that's great. So we have many customers that don't have separate businesses, holding companies, but they have separate BUs. I can think of 4 or 5 customers in the 12 BU range, and they mostly don't talk. So would you think this would be applicable for that kind of organization as well?
I definitely would agree with that. I think the only extra dimension that makes our story a little bit richer is that digital transformation is business transformation, in the sense that at no point in our organization was there even the pretense of integration. So everything had to start out to be pushed together.
Well, okay. Can we take that digital transformation is business transformation? Have we made a mistake by calling it digital transformation and not business transformation or something like that?
I try not to get too picky about the terms, because I know one of the things that gets involved here is the industry. If you looked at the Gartner, the Forrester lenses of the world, they were calling it digital transformation. It started to become business transformation. And maybe they're just getting to the same epiphany that we've been forced into, that you can't just think about this kind of migration. And you might think about it as a technologist or a technology executive as, okay, we're going to migrate the app layer to somewhere else in order to save money and consolidate it. Yeah. But you can't just do that without thinking about everything else. And that's, I think, why the terms get interchangeable or they have different connotations.
Yeah, it is frustrating to get hooked on the vocabulary. All right, well, so does that cover? Is there more about the story we should know? The name change, is there something there?
No, the name change is good. I mean, we really like the rebrand of Intrado. And there is a layer to it that is worth mentioning, is that Intrado, with all of these disparate technology systems and business units, we still acquired things to sort of thematically, functionally hold together a narrative. And there is generally this business to business support of mass notifications and the communications that ensue from it. That, very generally speaking, there's a lot of different technologies involved, a lot of voice traffic, for example, we've done historically, a lot of phone traffic, but that is essentially the story. So there is a hook, a functional hook, to start that process of pulling people together. And the Intrado rebrand is about that. we know that we own a very unusual combination of use cases. For example, we're in half of America's school districts for the notification system. We have many of the nation's 911 call systems. We do business with healthcare providers. That if you think about a certain city or county or state, yeah, we own unusual abilities to gain insights from it. So as the rest of the world is looking into AI, machine learning, how we might be able to apply insights to the information we have, the Intrado reband is part of that, and part of even another parallel commitment to the platform as a service and CI/CD initiatives of advancing those capabilities.
Yeah, that's the greatest jumping off place. You mentioned AI and ML, and one of the things in our conversations that I've learned about Intrado is that the stuff that we'll talk about, say, to roll out CI or a platform as a service or those kinds of things, that's a generic skill you consciously apply. And so if you wanted to roll out an ML thing, it would be the same. You would do the same process we're going to describe here for CI. That's another thing that I just have never seen a client with native capability to say, critical tech, game changer, put it on the ground with hundreds of development teams and get it through the system. Okay, let's jump off the CI, because I sit with customers and I'm like, hey, we can talk about an amazing amount of productivity, but you can't get anywhere without CI. It's like trying to have a factory assembly line without a line. So, all right, Colin, so we've talked all of this. How in the world did West Intrado make the choice to go all CI everywhere?
I think it comes, where I always start with this conversation, and when we talk about it at any of the summits we go to or any of the conferences, it comes back to the problem statement, right? What problem did we have that we thought CI would ultimately help us solve? It's not the only solution, right, I think, but it is a catalyst for everything that we needed to do. So, we had a massive portfolio, over 600-700 applications across Intrado, right? Diverse across all the different business units that Terry has mentioned. Our cost of change was too far to the right. We knew that, right? We wanted to bring things left. We wanted to get that shift left focus in the minds of our teams, whether that be the development, the operations teams, etc. We wanted to focus on quality. We knew quality needed to be increased. We knew we needed to improve the lives of our customers, but also our colleagues internally, right? And we wanted to get that done. And we also knew we had somewhat of a fragmented tool set that sat around all of that. We had many different business units doing things in different ways. And while we had maybe spots of the business that were doing a level of CI, we knew it wasn't the capability that or the shift that we really thought we should have.
Okay.
And so at that point we drove that.
Yeah, can we jump off on that particular thing? We knew we had pockets of CI or some CI. This is an objection that we frequently encounter. Oh, CI, yes, we're doing that. How do you determine whether you're doing CI or not?
Well, I think we said about it a kind of a slightly different way, right? So we knew, again, that we had teams that would put their hand up and say, yeah, you know what, we're doing CI, we're good. But we thought, okay, let's look at this a little bit differently. Let's decide what Intrado's vision of CI is as an enterprise, right? What our end goal is, what is the end state we want to get to, right? And that would be, being able to be cloud native and being able to deliver like that. And we said, let's build a plan around that. And then, those teams that you just called out, which you might refer to as, and I think you've mentioned the archetype before, the not invented here, right? And so, we have a CI process, we're good. I think you start to then show them the value of the CI process that you're developing as an enterprise, and that, to a degree, a level of jealousy starts to ensue, right? They say the other teams coming onto it, and they say, okay, yeah, we were doing CI before, we're not doing that, right? CI, I think, to your point, has different maturity levels. We always refrain from the word, myself and Terry always talk about this. Let's not use maturity, right? It has a little bit of a negative connotation to it. So we talk about the capability. So CI has many different capability levels to it. Different teams are at different levels. And I think that's one of the things you have to understand is you might have it in a pocket, but it's about the level that capability exists at within that pocket.
And so it sounds like you made a choice. Like if you're going to say you're doing CI, then you have to be able to deliver 12-factor apps. What's the criteria when you sit with a team to determine maturity? I understand.
Yeah.
What we frequently say is what's current practice.
Right.
What's
Right.
current practice? And so how do you figure out the delta from current practice to what, because it sounds like Intrado has a somewhat clear organizational definition of what CI means to them.
Yeah, and so we kind of look at it in two ways, right? It's a it's a procedural, it's a set of procedures and a cultural change that happens, and we have a set of tools that enable that, right? That's the way we look at it. So when we want to say, where in the CI process are you? Our capability model, as we describe it, has three main pillars to it. So we have the repeatable pillar, the consistent, and the optimizing. And I can talk a little bit through each of those at a high level. So when we talk about repeatable, we want teams to be thinking about the ability to work in small batches, the ability to have a single source of truth, version control, and that's how you kick off your process. And a branching strategy, right? Something that is a logical strategy that you can then apply to your pipelines. And that's what we talk about repeatable. And if you can get to that level, you're setting yourself up a foundation. Yep. Then you move into consistency, or our consistent pillar, which is a true focus around automation. So now you're moving into the ability to automate builds, right? Commits trigger builds through your CI. You've got automated deployments. You've started to think about shifting left in terms of both security and quality, and you're introducing automated unit testing, integration testing, and you're thinking about things of artifact promotion, right? You're now thinking, well, my artifact goes from dev to QA to staging to production. It's the same artifact. It goes the whole way through. So you're bringing a level of consistency into what you do as part of your pipeline. And then we look at optimizing our third pillar. It's not necessarily the last pillar, but what myself and Terry always describe it as is the point of no return. And that is, you are now you're starting to look at automated testing for both net new features and existing features. That's a game that'll play out forever. We all know that, right? You never get to 100%, but that's the ultimate goal. And you bring in automated security testing, static code analysis, open source analysis. Database automation is a big thing at optimizing, because now you want to keep your database at the same pace that your application delivery is happening at. And then a true level of optimizing is decoupled, and that's being able to make your release a business decision versus a technical decision. And so we split the model into those three capabilities. And then to a question that I'm sure will come from a lot of folks is, okay, that's great. How do you do that? The tools are an enabler to allow you to deliver those capabilities. That's how we've always looked at it.
Okay, and when you say tools are an enabler, what's the rest of the piece? Because I believe this is the fundamental disconnect at most customers.
So when you say with the rest of the piece, what we say, the way I look at it is tools are the enabler, right? So we talk about, if we want to start working in small batches, we want to have a single source of truth, we want a branding strategy. How do you deliver that, right? You bring in a tool let's say you've got your source control tool in, you've got your CI tool helps you automate, you've got your CD tools in there. How do you connect all of that, I guess, is a big question. We have we had a very strategic approach about how we wanted to roll these capabilities out to the business, right? We put together a very strict plan of, okay, we have a target of 300 applications. We want to move 300 applications over the next 18 months. And we want all of those to be slowly but surely moving their way through that capability model. And that involved things, and I'm sure Terry will kind of elaborate on this to a degree too around some of the other efforts, but we simply sat down and said, okay, let's do a quick, application profile. Let's understand which applications are good candidates for phase one, which ones are maybe phase two, which teams are maybe ready, right? You've got, again, the different types of teams. You've got the teams that are maybe ready to rock, right? They want to get going. They're the teams that you want to put in first because they're going to help you gain momentum as you go through. Yeah. You've got the teams that are maybe trailblazers and have already tried some of this on their own, right? So they've got a little bit there, and that's a much easier game because you just want to bring them into the standard set of tools you've brought in, and they start to be the change champions and the advocates that sit in all of your different offices that help you drive this forward too. So you focus on getting those teams in first, and that helps you start to pick up your momentum. And then you just start moving through that plan, right? You go team by team and you bring them in, you sit down, you have a technical kickoff with them. You understand what it is that they need. You understand where some of their problems are. You give the value proposition of CI and you introduce them, and then they start to see the value in it. And then that migration starts to take place, and you slowly but surely move your way through that portfolio with an end goal of you're always going to get to those groups of individuals, those teams that are maybe less interested or don't see the true value. And what we've tried to do is we started to bring in things like our digital transformation forum, which is essentially done every bi-weekly or every 3 weeks, depending on the topics. And that is a platform where we bring the teams that have been successful, and they stand up and they give a demonstration, they give a talk on how what they've done and what they've adopted from a capability perspective has helped them deliver and improve the lives of their customers and their colleagues. And if you can do that, that starts to create that urge within the rest of the organization to not be left behind. No one wants to be left behind, right?
I mean, this is part of the goal. Terry introduced me to this concept of kind of bringing the conference internally.
Right.
So it never occurred to me, but it's just the most brilliant thing. You have the staff on site. They do want to learn. Pretty much everyone would want to go to a conference that interests them. And so if you do that sort of thing. So if you're watching this and you're considering like what's the long tail of these strategies, this is one of the things. I'd like to turn to Terry really quick and ask, well, so you identify a team, maybe a trailblazer team. What does it look like? What do you do with that team, Terry? You hear, Team Foo is really good at this and they're raring to go, but we haven't had the discussion with them. What happens?
Let's take the lens of motivation, a couple different types of it, and we can even relate it back to the examples Colin laid out. Not new terms, extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic motivation means somebody's making you do it from the outside. It might be because you're coerced. It might be because there's just this clear, explicit goal from your supervisor to get something done. But then there's also intrinsic motivation. And this is on an individual level. But an individual might get motivated to make a change or make progress because he or she might be motivated in their own career, gaining adoption of new technologies, personal marketability. It might be that there's somebody who just wants to avoid 2 a.m. deployments on a Saturday morning because they don't like pizza at that time of week and they would rather have it at about 5 or 6 in the afternoon. So quality of life or your own personal self-actualization goals. These are hooks that lead to tactics for teams, because what I would suggest you do is think about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation from the perspective of a development team or a software team, a product team, that the extrinsic motivation comes from executives generally. I need you to decommission these assets because I'm going to have you re-platform over to Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Or I need you to stop using that Git that you've been doing on your own for a while. I need you to use this corporate Git for a number of reasons why. And it's going to integrate with your instance of ServiceNow or whatever your ITSM is supposed to be. Those are extrinsic motivations that relate to outcomes. They kind of relate to strategies, but not necessarily so if you're doing it right. So they are tactics, but you extrinsically motivate a team based on outcomes. But to take steps to get there, it is a more pragmatic engagement like what Colin was talking about. You talk with the team, you find what they actually think progress means to them. And it could be daytime production deployments. It could mean, I want to be able to commit something to Git and watch that thing propagate all the way through to stage, if not all the way through prod itself, because that's going to make their lives better. If you've got an issue with your product backlog, your product owner or product manager, then you go look at the backlog and you find that thing that's always been a frustrating conversation between the developers or the QA and the product manager of, that thing you want, that thing the customer's been complaining about, that's going to cost you a couple $1 million in a year and a half to fix. Find those wins in the backlog, find those quality of life improvements that will give them the first increment of change. Okay. And even more fundamentally under the concept of motivation is these are technologies we're talking about, but these are actually programs in practice. We're trying to take you to a goal and help you pragmatically find your steps to get there. This is all program talk, not platform, not product talk.
Yeah, so let's get to that critical thing, because many of the folks I talk to, there's no road paved for them. So let's jump back to Colin, because so there's this, Colin, is there a commitment to developers not working late hours, having humane things? Because we don't, if you guys got to that too, I really want to hear about that, because I don't hear anyone at the executive level trying to make IT and operations humane. So if you guys have done something there, let's hear it.
Yeah, I think the big change, when you look at from a team perspective, right? Ed Terry alluded to it. There's that desire to get away from that, but that always goes back to the question. Well, that's great, but ultimately, if something needs to go out, it needs to go out, and executives are going to say, well, it needs to go out whether that's 1 a.m. or it's 10 a.m. in the morning. That's not our problem. You solve it. That's not really what we saw, and I think that's what's also very unique about our journey is from we had a ground up swell, but also, a top down swell from our executive team. And they wanted to be able to see the lives of our colleagues change and become better because ultimately that increases the productivity and the quality of what we deliver. And so even I think a simple example is, and this is a more internal example, but, we have Ansible Terra deployed as one of our CD tools. And more recently, we were deciding, well, we need to make changes, we need to make upgrades there. Let's do it during the day. Let's move away from this. This is an internal tool that's used by our teams, yes, and it may be slightly disruptive if we have to, change something in the day should something go wrong. But we can't always live in fear of that happening. We have to think about how do we proactively set up a change and have, everything in place to allow us to accomplish that. And if you start to, what we saw happening is if you start to deliver that on your internal tools, it starts to deliver the message to all of development teams that, hey, this is actually okay now, right? We're starting to get to that point where making a change at midday is just the normal. And it's so normal that we're doing it on our internal services that we provide to you that are critical development tools for you to be able to deliver to customers. So if we're touching them, you can touch other stuff. But that all comes with, and Terry can probably speak to this a little bit too, and we actually just got off a call on it, is and ensuring that your teams understand the responsibility and the ownership that they then undertake, right? The pain goes away from your operations teams who probably know it the worst of having to stay up till 4 a.m. and being woken up every weekend and every holiday. And, that's just part and parcel of it, to bring it all into the DevOps culture of it's a team responsibility. So whether your title is a developer or your title is QA or your title is operations, you are ultimately responsible for that platform as much as the person next to you. So you as a team then decide, well, none of us want to be up late at the weekends. Let's figure out how we do this during the day. And we have a very, very supportive executive team around that model. And that's what we ultimately wanted to get to. So I think have we solved it? I think we're close to it. And I think we're getting to a point now where we're starting to see those changes just become religious that, we do it during the day. We don't touch stuff at night. Let's get away from that model. And that's I would say, as much of a cultural thing as it is anything else. And I think that's going to be the biggest hurdle any organization faces is sponsorship to allow that change to take place.
Yeah, and I'm just so fascinated because I have never seen an executive team from Thomas on down have really be so aligned. Let's see if we could. We're going to have Thomas on next week, I believe. Mm-hmm. But let's see if we can pull anything out of this, because a common case for our customers is that the CTO is new or is a lame duck. And same with the VP and everyone is kind of in flux. What I've noticed is that your executive team seems to be very well aligned. And so anything you could say that would help people row the same direction. I mean, I don't see executive teams rowing the same direction a lot at companies.
Sure. Yeah. Allies go ahead, Colin.
I was just going to say, I think they've lived the pain. That's how I would, if I was to say it in one sentence, is our executive team have lived the pain. And so they understand what needs to happen.
And how people live, people live in extraordinary pain. And I'm not exaggerating. They just live in these terrible, non-functional worlds and they're just kind of ducking. How did you decide to turn and face the actual tiger that was chasing you?
Sure. What I'd speak to is we were fortunate that we weren't the first initiative to try to go down this path. And we were lucky that we had really smart executives, a lot of turnover at that level, all relatively recent arrivals, Anoop Nair, our CIO, over to Thomas Squayo, our CTO, over to Robert Mahundro, our VP of Portfolio Delivery, a team dedicated to this kind of digital transformation change, which is what we're on, Colin and I are on. There was already a concurrent initiative to adopt a scaled agile framework for the enterprise. Yep. There had been historically a Lean Six Sigma initiative across this organization. There There had even been private cloud efforts, some significant investments to be able to make our private cloud more robust. And meanwhile, tentative proofs of concept and migrations to public cloud directly to infrastructure as a service providers, it wasn't hard to find allies conceptually. And conceptual allies became political allies because we were able to merge certain objectives. And the business plan that guided the specific investment in platform as a service, which is Pivotal Cloud Foundry, is one of decommissioning assets, efficiencies that are going to be intentional catalysts for procedural change like DevOps, to be able to merge and take on that idea of service ownership by development teams to actually own the production deployments. So again, that the allies were possible because there was a very good understanding that we're spending money on the adoption of tools and platforms explicitly to save some money in the near term, but get to that productivity that could take multiple forms, rapid value creation, release cycles, and so forth.
Yeah.
So really it's finding those allies and paying homage to scaled agile framework for the enterprise, for Lean Six Sigma, trying to pull all those concepts forward.
Yeah, it just continues to strike me the level at which you've taken what you can see on the ground seriously. Yes, we can save some money decommissioning, but then there's this whole productivity thing that, while it's not quantifiable, it's a much larger pie.
Yes.
And Intrado is this revolution is sitting right in front of literally every single technologist's face.
I think as well, you can, to a degree, you can start to actually quantify some of those other areas that we talk about, right? I think saving the money is the easy thing to do, right? We've got accountants for that, right? They'll jump in straight away, and you look at the rest of it, and you say, okay, well, how do we start to look at things like feature cycle time? How do we start to look at the things that matter? And we've been able to, at least, while we haven't got to the end game of where we want to be there, we've at least devised a model at which we can start to narrow in on those more granular metrics that I think ultimately tell the story in a much better way, right? Because they paint a picture, they corroborate everything. I always go back to a story, and it was near the beginning. I was sitting in a planning meeting with a group, and we were sitting there and we were talking about, we're trying to do this in sprint 2, but if we do that, that's 3 weeks of regression testing. And someone raised a question of why so much regression? Like, we have to test IE9, and that's manual. And we everyone kind of looked around and said, well, how many of our customers really use IE9? And no one really knew. And this team hadn't quite adopted the tool set or the capabilities yet. And so I said, I just thought, okay, light bulb, here's a moment where we can interject the value. And we talked about our monitoring solution. I was like, well, you can tell, like, just by instrumenting correctly who uses what. And so, we did it over a couple of hours, not a big deal. And immediately they wiped out 3 weeks of regression testing because they realized none of their customers use IE9, right? And so I think it was, when you start to quickly look at those, then you go, right, capturing these numbers is really what matters, right? Because, again, the dollars will always be there, but capturing that 3 week swell changes the entire mind of a dev and ops team, because they will say, oh, okay, I would like 3 weeks back in my life to do interesting things and not be regression testing a browser I don't need to be touching. Right.
Yeah. Fantastic. I mean, these are one of the things that's a challenge to describe this from the front side, from our perspective and from many customers to see, is that you will be picking up wins all the way along. To me, it's like playing a video game. It's like, I don't have anything. Oh, I've just found a magic sword. Like,
Gamify.
Yeah. And so, I think we are taking advantage of that gamification of the thing that Intrado has done is believe what you see.
Right.
You actually believe it and are willing to work it out. I've on the last 4 weeks, I've been doing a lot of travel, and every executive that I spoke with believes it, but they don't believe it enough to take action on it, or even to do an experiment to say, whoa, what would be across a month of doing a few of these things? What would be some of the wins we wouldn't have even known to look for that because of the tooling, we can deliver?
Go ahead, Terry.
Something I believe in strongly right in this box is, I mentioned the portfolio delivery team, and we're on the team. So of course we think we're awesome, but that's not my point here. What I'm trying to indicate is we're a group of people whose job, what we actually own, is not to define what a successful app transformation is. It's not our job to define what DevOps point of no return is, what CI/CD maturity is. Our job is to broker that definition with multiple parties within this organization. We're on the hook for consensus. And if that's in it, and so what I stress to executives of other potential or current customers of an initiative like this is, find somebody who owns brokerage, find somebody who owns consensus, because that typically puts Colin and me in this position of figuring out who's our real gatekeeper. That DevOps milestone that Colin just referred to in the previous conversation was a series of application development teams that are taking on the task of actually pushing the apps into prod. And what does that entail? You got to do some change control before within the lines, and you got to be ready for incident management. You got to be able to triage. You got to be able to have your communication plan. You got to have your on-call rotation set up. And so we turned it into a live event where that formal milestone of granting service ownership to these teams, we just did it in front of 200 people on a conference call and vetted them right in front of them. So we've got a few dozen app dev managers now thinking about, well, shoot, I can do that too if I just get a couple things done. But you own brokerage, you own consensus, you don't own the answer.
Yeah. Let's see, we're a long way in, and I actually did not ask you to describe your organization. So why don't you do titles and that part of the organization? Because no one has this. No one has the brokerage in-house to do this. So let's break down your org and maybe people and roles.
Sure. High level, go way up to the top of the organization. We have a chief information officer. Reporting to him as a chief technology officer. The CTO owns all of the software engineering and software quality assurance folks. Alongside that CTO is a senior vice president of platform operations. And the platform operations is the legacy platform and people who have been managing these applications in production for a while. That SVP also owns our infrastructure team too, networking teams and so forth. Alongside, outside of the CIO's organization entirely, are our product managers. They actually report to our verticals, our business units, and the business-facing leadership, historically sales-driven leadership that sits over there in that part of organization. But if you go down from Thomas Squayo, our CTO, you'll find a vice president of portfolio delivery, Robert Mahundro. And you'll be talking to them in the next episode along with me. Yeah. That portfolio delivery team is where Colin sits, I sit, and also a man named Don Fosgreen, who is basically an architect / hotshot application developer, app transformation guru extraordinaire with a roving band of minstrels that are a center of excellence within our organization. So Don plus Colin plus Terry are basically there to forge that consensus over and over again, consulting either on process or how you're actually going to move yourself towards auto-scaling within PCF, or whatever that tactical objective is. We're a team of people who are dedicated to ultimately a self-eliminating transitional authority. Yep. We're trying to push people through business transformation via CI/CD, PCF, and application performance monitoring, and enterprise-wide adoption of New Relic.
Yeah. So I mean, I just look at this from an executive level. You're spending for 3 staff members, and we'll round that to $1.5 million a year. And so, have you guys done the math on the value you're delivering to the field? We're going to pay you $1.5 million a year, all told. What am I reaping from the frontline developers, all the way through production there?
Well, since I am paid $1.5 million a year, I'm not sure your math lines up.
Yeah,
but I'll just go ahead and assume a more rational salary.
I volunteer for this role, so it's probably on point.
Yeah. He's pro bono. That is true. There is, in the sense of it's our team. We're factored into the expense of the entire business plan. And there is plenty of fiscal justification that comes from basically the cost savings that are at the core of decommissioning assets and being able to make ourselves more flexible. But there is also in the nature of the transition from this transitional authority, which is a fiscal authority among other things, over to what we would just call BAU, business as usual. And in the context of that, there's still an ongoing negotiation about exactly the long-term role, the long-term program guidance that's going to be around it, because there is also traditional project management, PMO support that they're coming along with us for the ride. In about a year, they're going to fall off. What's going to happen to the project and the program and the team? Do we dissolve into other organizations? Because we all come from other parts of the BAU enterprise. So there is still that opportunity to re-justify the expense of our team based on the prospects for further savings or productivity gains.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you have done the Cotter network thing there, which is described in this book, Accelerate. Okay. Yeah. And I think that is a great model, and certainly a model I would like to socialize with other customers.
I think one thing I would just add there, and it's like a summary of, you can't do any of this in the margins, right? And that's why our team exists, is because if you do it in the margins, you won't be successful at it. Taking someone and saying, okay, you're 20% allocated to delivering transformation is just not going to work, right? Because you get sucked into everything else. I think it's been a really, I think it's one of the most unique things, as Terry said, that, we've done as a team, but it's been so successful because we've been given latitude to go and do it. And I think that's what has made this possible, for us to at least be the brokers that we are.
Yeah. So that's 3 full-time people. And then you said a roving band of minstrels. Are there other developers who just like teaching and they join in, or?
Yeah, they get special training with Pivotal, and they're generally veterans of their own app transformations. And so they're useful. We make sure because we're a portfolio that's got some .NET. We've got a lot of Java, we've got that general mixed bag. So people with those backgrounds that are capable of working on that particular type of app transformation, the project management office that helps us out too. But again, if we're successful in owning the brokerage and the consensus of progress and outcomes and change, then that gives us natural allies. And we have, in effect, gotten partial allocations from a lot of people to help us out because we're now advocates for what they want to see happen. That DevOps milestone didn't happen necessarily because Colin or I needed to see it happen. We needed it because the operational leadership really needs to see this thing happen. And we're an active agent to help them get there.
It's awesome. I mean, when I look at this, when I was a young person, I thought, conquest was the way I was going to win. But as I matured a bit, I realized connection is really the way you get things done. And so it sounds like the model that you've got is like, I don't know, I just feel like this open, honest, like, hey, here's some business goals. And then I do want to ask about opposition, because we've talked about things like choosing enterprise level tools. Boy, that is always a political fight. We talked about, I mean, man, I can't wait to hear the story of how you reached out and partnered well with PMO, because in classic organizations, that sounds very challenging. So those two things, what were the fights about making top level tool choices, and how did you overcome them? And let's get the PMO playbook, because that's going to be gold itself.
Top level tool choices, and I'll defer to Colin on the CI/CD tool stack, but the pivotal part was easy. There were relatively few choices to make, and once you're in, you're all the way in. Yeah. And that choice was actually made before I even arrived, although Don, a part of our team, was instrumental in that particular discussion. So choice of that tool wasn't hard, but all of the ecosystem of services, what we noticed about, say, the data layer, for example, is, okay, let's say you're taking your apps from on-prem to AWS. What's going to happen with that SQL Server database that you've got sitting there? And how's that? Are you going to replicate it? And oh my gosh, what do you do? We intentionally cause problems by transforming applications. And we just make sure we're letting those gatekeepers, the people that actually own data architecture at the business, who might not even be aware of the dynamic of app transformation, get them into a position where they can decide, and let them decide again too. Don't force them to commit. Turn it into an MVP, POC type of framework, get them to do their own bake-off, because we're forcing the action. We're knocking on every door in this business. So that's kind of what we do with the tool fight. Is we don't really own those tools. Now, we do own a lot of vendor relationships once those decisions are made, but there's really an ethos of get the right people to make the decision, and then whatever they're not comfortable doing in terms of relating to that vendor, interacting their contributions to those of our initiative and our business and our native staff, we take ownership of that whenever we need to. We broker, we build the consensus. We don't own the answers, we own the kinesis of getting to the outcomes.
Nice. Yeah.
I think, on the CI/CD side, I mean, and again, there's a multitude of tools even that we did end up selecting, just because there's so many elements to it. But we focused on two main areas. It wasn't necessarily which tool has the biggest name or anything like that. It was which tool do we feel has an ease of use that we can adopt, because that's going to be important to any enterprise adoption. You can't pick something that has a steep learning curve or it just won't get there. It doesn't matter how many of myself or Terry exist, we physically won't be able to figure that part out. And then the partnership side of it was a big piece for us. We wanted to bring in tools and vendors that we felt would be a part of the journey with us, who were as interested in our success as we are. And so, we have vendors today for a good chunk of the CI/CD stack that literally sit in our chat rooms and will help answer questions to our colleagues. It's not just us, right? And so I think that was a big part of it. And so when you get any pushback from people saying, oh, why didn't you choose this tool or this tool? It's ultimately, all these tools have great capabilities. What it came down to us was criteria that really you don't compare them on, right? You compare them on ease of use and partnership, and that's what we focused on.
One small tactic to insert here too is Colin and I both have backgrounds as product owners, product managers. People got pain, people got problems they want to solve. If you have people that can convert pain into use cases, and that's the nutrition that those guys making the choices on tools always want.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, that's an example of how we fill the gap and keep it going.
Yeah, you're really describing a layer that has been, and there's no fault of the industry even, but the tool sets weren't at this point until now.
Correct.
Certainly the APM tools are unbelievable. Like, you really want to be very close with that APM vendor, because you can tell a huge amount of stuff that was never available before.
Can't do this without them.
Yeah. I mean, I would never run with that one. So, so there's never been this, I don't know, it's kind of, I guess internal integration is not a new concept in IT, but it seems like in 2019, it's a much more powerful concept than it was, say, the last time I heard about internal integration tools, which is probably the 90s or something like that. So that just fascinates me that there seems to be, I realize you guys are ad hoc for a few years to do this, but it really seems like that function that you're describing is a new required function. I don't know. We'll have to continue to explore
the
that.
Mission, when the team was created, the first time we had a real meeting to kind of talk about what we were going to be, how to plot out our own KPIs for the next year. What Thomas, our CTO, said to us was, he said, your job is to be what this business isn't. Your job is to figure out why things don't change and be that gap that used to exist before. And then on top of that, the overlay of your job is to enhance the valuation of your company by advancing capabilities. We happen to be talking about DevOps, CI/CD, application performance monitoring today, but that could be the same mechanic, the same team applied to AI and ML capabilities at your organization. Whatever that strategy is, then you find people who are dedicated to advancing that goal without owning the answers, the outcomes, owning the solicitation and consensus of them.
I think, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Colin.
I was just going to say, I kind of always bring it back to like the simple analogy in my head of how I look at everything we're doing. It's like, it's the automatic car versus the stick shift or the manual. Right? Everyone wants to sit in the automatic. You still need to be there. You still need someone at the wheel. We still need all of our teams, but our lives are a hell of a lot easier, right?
Yeah.
And everyone's more interested in the automatic version. Yeah. And that's just how I look at it.
So let's do as our last thing. How do you choose to hire people for this kind of brokerage, smoothing, like holding up the mirror kind of team? Those are hard roles, I think, to define and hire for. How did you do it?
These people don't need to be technical, although it helps. They need to be systemic. That your intelligence must be about something as complicated as an outcome or a strategy, and how cross-functional roles can work together to get there. People who can understand that flow, people who can understand almost that air traffic control vectoring of trying to align these competing strategies and objectives. As a traditional standing tactical role, the people that tend to have that correspondence to it might be your product managers, might be your product owners, because it's multiple inputs at the same time. people who want to work on technical debt versus people who need that thingy for the biggest customer within 3 months, that those people are naturally arbiters. But that ability to arbitrate multiple inputs and embrace of ambiguity, because there's going to be a lot of days when you're not going to feel like you've been successful, but you may have had 6 or 7 conversations that might have little seeds and pockets of value.
I do find that, yeah.
And so also, and just as tangible skills, can you write requirements? Can you actually, whenever anybody calls you out on, you haven't given me requirements, you haven't told me what you needed done, you must be skillful with that. Again, that might lead you to a product manager, could also lead you to a business analyst too, typically. Just had to do that type of work. But that's the real skin in the game, is you're going to have to propel things, and there's going to be gaps. Those gaps generally come in the form of teams not knowing what they're supposed to do next. So you've got to be able to articulate that. Visualizing data is also something that would be a very handy skill, because you're going to be responsible for a lot of reports using data sets that don't exist, at least not related to one another. So some skill with data wrangling, some skill with data visualization, because you're going to have new types of reports that no one's ever seen before.
I think two quick things I would add there is, value focused is a big thing, right? You need to be focused on why you're doing it, what the value is you're getting out of it, because you're going to be the advocate for it. And passion, I think, is the big thing. I know both myself and Terry, we love what we do. It's some days it's crazy, and some days it's very, it's hard to tell, hey, did I really accomplish anything today? But, I think we're very passionate about what we do, and I think that's something that you have to have. And Don is the same. You talk to Don and you'll just believe what he tells you, which is a strong skill.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Gentlemen, sharing how you do this is a real service to the industry, because people do not have good maps. So thank you very much for coming and talking about how it works for you. And, thanks to Intrado for willing to be doing this with even more folks. So look forward to the next episode where we will talk to Thomas Esquello, CTO, and anyone else?
Robert Mahundro, who is the VP of our portfolio delivery team, he and Thomas complete one another. You'll see.
There you go. And so here are executives who are going to give you their point of view on how they stand this up and how they achieve over a several-year time span. So thank you very much for joining the Entrado Way video series. This is the end of season 1, episode 1.
Yes, sir.
We will see you.
Binge watch. Take care.
Thanks, guys.